Hello everyone, my name is Josh Richards and I'm the Marketing Director at Merit Solutions. And I want to first thank you for joining us today for our webinar titled Convincing Your CFO that Dynamics 365 is a Good Choice. I do think we have a great session planned for today, but prior to formally introducing our presenter, Michael Gesser, I wanted to cover a couple housekeeping items first. So first we wanted to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be shared with attendees following the event. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. However, we invite you to use the Q&A panel and GoToWebinar to submit any questions or comments you may have. I will monitor those questions and we'll try to save some time at the end of the session for a Q&A with Michael. And then finally, today's session is the second webinar in our series, Leading Life Sciences to Success in a Digital Future. This series is co-sponsored by Microsoft, and we want to make sure we thank our partners like Onshore Technology Group 3 weeks ago and Michael Gesser and HAP Innovations today for their support. So if you look at the list of sessions here, after today's session, we'll be getting more into the actual product demonstration sessions of the webinar series. And during these sessions, we'll be joined by presenters from Microsoft, and we'll cover topics from financial management, manufacturing, quality, compliance, cloud security, and cloud validation. And then all of these sessions are up on our website, so if you want to go sign up online, if you're interested in joining us, you can feel free to do that at www.meritsolutions.com. The link is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So I think that is just about enough from me. I'd like to now take a moment to introduce you to our presenter today, Michael Gesser, the CFO of HAP Innovations. They're a consumer health technology company with products that help patients self-manage their health, like tracking and dispensing medications. Michael's been in the CFO controller role for life sciences companies for more than a decade and has been involved with a handful of ERP evaluations in the past. And today we've asked him to share what he's learned during these projects and why he believes Dynamics 365 is a good choice. So without further delay, Michael, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here. I know what it's like to be on the other side of this call. I've done a bunch of them, so I will try to keep this informative, light, and not too repetitive. But just a quick little bit of background about me. I am a finance guy. I've been a finance guy my whole career. It seems like every time I join a company, they're implementing an ERP, and that goes back to the late 80s, where I joined a company and they were implementing something called Man. And I've done PeopleSoft, I've done MFG Pro, JD Edwards, I've done Oracle in many iterations, and SAP in many iterations. And over the last few years, I started with 2012 when I was with Osmotica. Went to Dynamics 365 with Suntech, and beginning of the year, I came to a new company, HAP, which is a startup, really. We're just starting to commercialize now, and we are not running 365 yet, but hopefully we will shortly. I happen to know the guy with the checkbook, so I think I could probably talk him into going with a good system. So with that, let's just jump right in here, and I'm going to drone on. Please do pop questions in. Josh is the guy, and we can manage it from the since he's going to pull all the questions together and ask us at the end if there are any questions. So just to start, I'm going to talk to you in perspective as the CFO, but from the other side of the coin, where I was the guy asking for the ERP many times or involved in that process. But as the CFO, when you hear ERP, you immediately think that's a lot of non-revenue cash. And if I've got to invest in something, I'd rather invest in things that are actually going to bring me a return. And there are ways to justify, and there are ways that we'll talk about mitigating a lot of the impact of this, that a ERP will have on the cash flow of a company and on the drain in value, meaning we've got to deploy people to implement it. But the problem is that they're really big and ugly. They take a long time, and they can fail like nothing you've ever seen before. And there are lots and lots of war stories out there about turning on an ERP one morning on a Monday morning and then not being able to bill or do transactions or anything else for weeks on end. So to quote a famous saying, they're like horses. They're dangerous at both ends and crafty in the middle. And they're just a lot of work. They can kill a company. They can kill it and still be successful because they just take so much effort. And quite frankly, you probably don't need one yet. You can always say, well, I'll do it next month. It's one of those easy decisions because you're already able to do the accounting and you're already able to bill, and maybe you can do transactions in manufacturing. So do I really need it today? I'll wait till next year. The problem ends up being back in the 70s when these systems started coming in, it was very easy to justify implementing computerized systems because you just fired all your accounts payable people that were doing things manually and typing checks, and the clerks and all those kind of people that were tracking spending on column pads and whatnot. We've gotten, all that's gone now. You don't really save people by putting in an ERP because you're already designed to not need all those people. So qualifying that is a real strain, but we're going to talk about some things I think that will help us. Lots of companies are out there not implementing and upgrading their ERP because they're waiting. And usually they're not really planned well because companies don't plan well in general, and they specifically don't plan well with this size of implementation. Nothing that they will do, most companies, nothing they will do will be as big as a corporate-wide ERP implementation. And I include that as the building of, a second factory. This is just a big deal, and it gets, it's like, to me, I've always said it's like taking a human body and draining all the blood and fluid out of it and then pumping it back in. You got to do that right, or otherwise things are going to go very bad. And the thing about CFOs, I'm going to talk about this over and over and over again. We love surprises. We can't wait to get surprised. We can't wait to get an invoice that we didn't expect, to get an FDA audit we didn't anticipate, to get an SEC call if we're publicly held, to have our tax position change because our auditors finally figured something out that they shouldn't have. We live for surprises. We can't wait, and ERPs are just full of surprises. But let's get down to straight away into the meat of this thing, and it's really about how do we start the process and what do we want to do with that. And the biggest thing that I will tell you is you got to know the business. You got to know your audience. You can't go into your CFO or the head of the company's office and say, hey, I want to do an ERP when they're struggling with cash flow, when they're struggling with they just lost a big customer, when they have a quality problem in manufacturing. Those things will happen time to time, but I'm talking about the major things that really keep the executive team up at night. If they're looking at expanding production and they need to burn all their cash in investing in new equipment or building a second factory or whatever that might look at, you need to know that because we don't want to compete against other investments because you'll lose. You need to know where the company is, where they are in the cycle, and start the planning process early. We've got to be process focused early because capital budgets are rolling, strategic budgets are rolling, the impact on operating expenses is important. So start the process early. Think in terms of a year or two down the road. Now, I know that the sales guys don't want to hear that, but from a process of getting it approved, you got to really put your toe in the water gently, not making ripples, because we want to be able to start talking about this with the executive team, let them start digesting that they're going to have to think and plan on it because they're going to have to come up with the funding. They're going to have to come up with the P&L impacts. They might have to talk to investors. The good thing about 365, which we'll talk about a little bit, is it's changed the dynamics, no pun intended, in how ERPs are looked at. We no longer have this big bolus front-end investment in infrastructure and licensing and software, really, and then implementation. The only really big bolus of investment we have is in the implementation. One of the things you'll find is that I think the 365 implementation process has gotten a lot easier. We leveraged something called Quick Start at Suntech, where we basically installed the demo. It was plain vanilla, and we didn't spend a lot of time planning on what we were doing at the time and how we wanted to look different after the implementation. We basically built the demo. We went in and trained people, and they said, oh, well, can it do this? And we would make the adjustments at that time. So we kind of changed the process, found it to be very successful, and I think that's probably for a lot of companies, the new model going forward. But 365 is going to put a twist in this conversation a little bit, again, because of the investment up front. Go talk to your IT guys if you're not the IT guy, but clearly the technology roadmap, where are you going and how does this fit in? If you currently have infrastructure and you're running a in-house or in a supported off-site facility, you're buying a lot of infrastructure, you're buying a lot of equipment. Understand where you are on the life of that. When is it that you're going to want to do a full server refresh? What is it costing us to do that? And what are our plans going forward related to Office 365 and Outlook 365 and SharePoint and all the suite of Microsoft tools that are available? Because one of the things we're talking about is finally a fully integrated ERP that's cloud-based with all the other stuff we've got. If you're running old versions of Outlook and Excel, you probably want to look at when the technology roadmap says you should be upgrading to 365, because that'll be part of the conversation that'll be a little easier to have. And the other thing I cannot stress enough, and it's the final big bullet here, is put the rigor in. One of the things about life sciences, you'll find if you've got to put the rigor in, because you need a very, very good and robust user requirement specification, because that's going to be part of the validation. You need to have the validation plan well documented, because that's a big cost of the implementation. Most of your partners are going to be very good about implementing the system itself, but how do we validate it, or do we even validate it? That really depends on your quality and regulatory organization, what you're making. It was a big deal for us in solid oral dose manufacturing and injectable manufacturing, not so much in the devices that I've been making the last couple of jobs. So, put all that work in up front as part of the ERP request. Do a lot of risk analysis, and I'm going to talk about that in specifics a little later. Come up with a project plan. I'm going to talk about that too, because it's really not about the plan, it's about the planning. Understand change management from all aspects, not just the transactional things that you think about, but all the knock-on effects and all the things that are going to have to be affected, like EDI and any kind of applications that are pulling data or pushing data into the system, and how people are going to react to that. One of the things that I will tell you that I was very public about Suntech and about the 365 process we went in there is I wanted that as a transformative event. I wanted to change the way that business ran and the culture that was there. And the best and easiest and quickest way for me to do that was through an implementation of an ERP that touched everybody and everything. And I was allowed to, in essence, reinvent our culture by doing that. So if your culture is important to you and you don't want to change it, that's just as big a deal with an ERP implementation as changing the culture. You want to be very, very mindful of that, and that's got to be part of the plan. And then you need to quantify the benefits. And I don't just mean I'm going to save money because I'm going to fire 2 people that are in accounts payable. There's a whole lot of benefits that can be realized. And again, I'm going to have a list of those things in a little bit, and we can talk about that. But this is the point where I would normally ask if you have any questions, but since we're not doing that till the end, I won't. So it's about telling the story, and I will talk about that a lot because if you think about TED Talks, and TED Talks are informative and they're engaging for the most part, but part of the preparation that happens for a TED Talk is it's not just some person walking out on stage and doing a presentation. About 70 or 80% of a TED Talk is a story, and that story leads them down into explaining something or selling something or inspiring something, but it's about the story. You've got to figure out what your story is related to an implementation or why you want an ERP. And working through that is very important. It's not just the P&L impact. It's not about the capital that you need to spend. It's not about the project plan. It's about the story. And that's why I like to talk in terms of 365 really, because we could also use that story around 2012, but I'll talk in terms of 365. It's about leveraging the Microsoft innovation in cloud security. We are in a business here where cloud security is highly important in our industry. Medical device, I've got patient information, I've got a validated system, and so that cloud security is very, very important to me. And a funny story about that is, in my prior company, the ownership, the equity behind my company was in England, and they really struggled with going to the cloud. They really struggled with us going off premises with our box and going into the interweb, so to speak. And I was in a meeting with our board, and I looked at our board chairman and said, look, if you think I'm better at protecting our data than Microsoft, I'm in the wrong business, and I should go out on my own and sell my services. You've got a world-class organization that sets the bar on data security, running your ERP for you in their cloud. I don't know how more secure you can get. Maybe the Russians can hack it, but I don't know that they really care to. That is a huge thing for us, and we need to be part of the story with that. The Power BI tool that comes with 365 is great. There is work to be done on getting it better by Microsoft. There's work to be done in the implementation. You could clearly go out and buy an add-on package that has a lot of cubes already designed, and there's a lot of work, but leveraging the Power BI tool and all the things it's designed to do within the suite, the Office suite is phenomenal. Those of us in life sciences, we have a heightened sense of requirements. Valerie King-Bailey talked a lot about it a couple of weeks ago. She is absolutely the expert on it. She is one of the most delightful people you'll ever work with also. But we have to have this right, because what we do in life sciences affects people's health and could affect their life directly. And we have demonstrated installs, validated installs of 2012, of 2009, and of 365 in all levels of complexity of life sciences companies. So, it's demonstrated it's there. We have HIPAA, who I have to deal with in my world here, and then the HIPAA version in the EU, which is called GDPR, which sounds like an old Eastern Bloc country. Both of those are very well managed inside of Microsoft, as well as 365 offering UDI, which is Unique Device Identifier for those of us in the device world, and ePedigree whenever and wherever that might come back again. So there are solutions in 365. And the thing that I will stress over and over again is AXUG as an amazing resource. I was down there in Tampa last year. I continue to be amazed by that. In the old days, it was Convergence, but how many people are there from Microsoft, from all the vendor partners, how much help you can get by just going and getting engaged with user group, and then within the specific special interest group like life sciences. There's lots of us who've done lots of things. We've probably seen it, or we know the guy that has, and it is an amazing resource that's got to be part of the story. We have a lot of great implementers. You go with the gold standard implementers that Microsoft has, and you'll get the highest quality service. You can imagine. There's lots of stories about re-implementation, and it's usually they're never pretty. And the other piece of 365 that's a great story that was a big sell for me back in the 2012 days when I did implementation of Monica was the ISV model. The ability for us to find a technology support that could come in and be fully integrated into our ERP, and you don't see any difference. It's like I always described it as an add-in to Excel when it's just another tab on the top. When I could run HR or complex billing in the pharmaceutical world or maintenance in AX and have my folks not see any difference in how they did things was amazingly important and helped with the training, and it reduced our training costs. And that is a huge part of this story. And the last piece comes back, and there's a little bit what I talked about earlier about the way we're implementing 365 by putting in a vanilla model and then configuring it as we're training people has gotten to be, to me, I think it's the key. The thing about, and I'm going to misquote this number, but there's an excess of 150 or 160 processes in 365. Those are business processes. Procure to pay, order to cash, work order processes, all those kind of things. And the ability for the Microsoft implementer to give us a standard business practice solution is very economical. And my view on that was, and this is part of the story that I was telling, is I'm going to use the business process in the system as my business process. I'm going to change my business process to match that, because that is a better solution. We're not unique in what we do. Most of us are so generic, in how we manufacture and what we do, that inventing some new way of doing the accounts payable process, because that's the way we've done it all in the past, was just ridiculous to me. So it was a very, very powerful story that we could tell with Microsoft and with the life sciences aspects of what it could offer us. So we got a story, but now we need to talk about the what I call the value proposition. And I didn't invent this word. I actually got this word when I was at Ingersoll Rand, but solutionize. You got to think about all the problems that you have in the company, and you have to make sure that you're leveraging the implementation to help solve those problems, because the ERP has got to be about solving the problems. And the more articulate you are about problem solving, talks about value, not about cost. They're different. Is how do you improve the value of what you do and how you do it? Can reducing the amount of transaction time that you have with a person so that they can spend more time analyzing helps with your value. There are financial benefits that we're going to talk about, including cost avoidance, that will happen by going with the new ERP and implementing it appropriately. But it's kind of the combination of those two things. Cutting cost or mitigating cost and raising value are things that when you're in this meeting and the CFO is sitting on the corner and he's doodling on his paper, he's going to look up when you start talking in those terms. He's not going to understand, I shouldn't say it that way, but he doesn't necessarily care about or doesn't necessarily understand all of the techie things that typically get talked about in this, about speeds through the on the internet, and how data is configured and those kind of things related to technology. But he does understand what value is and what costs are, and about solving problems. And he's going to be very, very concerned about risk. And this is really a story ultimately about risk mitigation. There's risk involved in the project itself. We talked about that. It's related to how onerous the ERP can be, but it needs to offset the risk that your business has by not doing it. And being able to, again, understand the business so you can talk about that. And the biggest thing to do is go in and find out, and I've got one of these spreadsheets, I've had it for years, it's all different colors, but I've got a corporate risk analysis. I keep it in a spreadsheet. It involves, key employees leaving. It involves biggest customer bailing. It involves, the normal kind of things of crime and fraud. It involves things like what happens if there's a fire? What happens if there is a data breach? What happens if, and for me right now, I'm in the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm on the flight path of the airplane's landing. What happens if there's a natural disaster or a hurricane or a tornado? All of those kind of things we talk about from a risk standpoint. What happens if if they reintroduce the Affordable Care Tax on medical devices? That's all in my spreadsheet. And I worry about what's a real threat and what's not. But find out what those are. What are the corporate risks that your CFO is dealing with, and figure out how you're going to solutionize them. This cannot be an IT exercise. I cannot, just express myself firmly enough on this and stress it. It cannot be an IT exercise, because that will lose people. This has got to be a business value question. And I said I was going to go over a list of financial considerations, and these are very, very important. And there's really three things you need to think about. They're basically three different buckets. There is quantitative things, and these are things that are measurable, that I can, as a CFO, look at and say, that's going to save me money. This is important. So you look at things like, better payables or longer payables or more precise payables, or, better inventory turns. I go from 8 inventory turns a year to 12, or I go from 18 to 24. I can calculate what that savings is. I can tell you what that means in this company, and it's more than just the imputed interest on inventory. It has to do with how much cash I've got tied up. It has to do with how much property or how much of the rack space is tied up. How nimble I am on things I can calculate, and those are all important there on the list. And end-of-life management was a big deal for those of us that are in a technology like a medical device, where I'm wrestling with obsolescence of components and making sure that I'm using the components so I'm not writing them off at the end. Again, the technology that 365 and 2012 brings is a very, very powerful thing that can happen there. Do I have the right number of distribution centers? Can I consolidate distribution centers? Am I going to get, better cycle times? And all these kind of things on this list are all quantifiable and drop straight through. They're cost savings. The qualitative things are more value as opposed to cost savings. These are value enhancements. The big ones being like data security and general security of the cloud and of the hackability of what you got. Is there a better process for vendor management that allows us to then manage our vendors better and negotiate better, that drives costs down, that move from the qualitative column over into the quantitative column? And all of these can be valued, but they're not cost reductions. So you actually have to, you do add them together, but you can't talk about cost savings except for in the first column. And then the avoidance piece is the big thing for me. And again, I come back, I'm looking at this differently. I'm already worried about the investment, but now it doesn't mean as bad as it used to, because I'm buying licenses when I need them. It's fitting into the Office 365 environment. It's fully integrated. Well, I like that. The implementation costs are somewhat mitigated because, we're going to buy a vanilla, basically implementation. We're going to customize or configure some of those things going in, but during the training process is going to be configured better. So I like all of that. But how do I do this other stuff? How do I reduce risk? Go back to that risk document and find the things on there that we can help mitigate those risks that help me sleep at night. Is disaster recovery, and how quickly you have to come back up. Those of us in life sciences, if you don't have your ERP running, you're not manufacturing. Do you have issues where you've got manufacturing across the globe? So you have, continuity issues you have to deal with. You've got uptime and downtime. Do you have your boxes sitting in the U.S., but you have a manufacturing operation in Costa Rica, and you have connectivity problems there? That kind of stuff gets solved better with this kind of solution. Employee self-service. You're not tying up people with changes of all the HR work, or even self-service if you think about it from a customer standpoint or a vendor. If I'm a customer, why can't I go online and buy stuff? Why do I have to send emails or faxes? My God, I still get faxes for orders. Or call somebody, God forbid. Why cannot businesses have the Amazon, what I call the Amazon model? I do that all night at my, at home. The people that are coming along in business behind me, and you can tell by my picture, I've been around a little while, are very comfortable with buying everything on the internet. People are buying groceries now, right? They're buying almost pre-made dinners, and they show up and they just cook them. So is there a way for us to develop a B2B self-service tool that allows them to go on the system, choose what they want to buy? It knows what price that we've agreed to. It knows what's in inventory and tells them what their delivery date with no human interaction. That's a huge amount of avoidance on my side, and it's a huge increase in customer satisfaction because they're owning their own process. They can do it from anywhere at any time. And the other thing, again, I talk about culture, is how to keep the culture churn. If you are worried about, you've got your culture like you want it, but you're afraid of the churn that's going to take it in a different direction, how does increasing employee satisfaction and cultural satisfaction and employee engagement, how can you improve that by having a world-class system? Well, I imagine a little bit better than having a 20-year-old ERP like I had in my last company that was a drudge to work with. So again, when you're telling the story, make sure you touch all these, but understand, as the finance guy, only talk about cost savings as part of the quantitative measure. You can't use that term for qualitative avoidance, but both of those have a high amount of value for your CFO when you're discussing this. I only have a couple more slides, and then we can certainly get into questions. But I talked about the plan, and I'm going to talk to you in terms not as the engineering guy who likes Microsoft project. I'm going to talk about what I've learned about this process, doing it 20 times with ERPs, including upgrades and reinstalls, with R&D projects, with building out a factory, those kind of things. It's about the planning. It's about the process of planning, not the plan, because the plan really is, like I say, it's a cool graphical representation. We love to see Gantt charts, and a lot of folks like to know dependencies and all that, and all of that is very important. But the planning is about communication, and that's what we have to be good at. And when plans fall apart, it's because communication has fallen apart. You got to be able to communicate the goals, the roles, and the process to everybody that's involved in this. The other piece of this, and it's my change of the word, I taught you hear about understanding and documenting change management. Well, I can tell you, you don't manage change. You don't really. Change is happening. What you do is you have to really adapt to the change that's happening. And it's an important nuance, but to me, it's been something that's been self-evident, is how do you come up with and how do you make sure that you're communicating the plan appropriately so that people can adapt to it in the direction you want them to adapt? Because change, adapting to change could be, oh, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to sabotage it, or I'm going to slow down, or I like the way I used to do it. That's adapting to the change. The other way, though, is to be able to convey what the change will mean, and to get everybody energized and aligned behind that change. And that's an important thing to be able to convey as part of the ERP pitch, because that's one of the reasons ERPs fail, is because the people that have to get it done, not the guy sitting in the corner office, not the guy with the project plan, not necessarily the IT guy in the back room with all the machines. It's the people on the floor and the people in the accounts payable office and the people in the production planning office that can just throw the wrench into this. So important, understand change and how you're going to plan and communicate it. Again, ERP can be positively disruptive, and again, I like that. I like change. I like disruption in the good way. I like transformation. And this is kind of a bit of a joke, but if you make a list of the top 10 problems in the company, your new RP will solve 5 of them. 3 won't matter as much anymore, and the other 2 will retire or quit. So, understand what it is that you're trying to get to. It's a lot more than a new system. It's about the culture, and can drive a new culture or change the organization or inspire the organization. And don't lose sight of that when you're talking through that with your executive team. And again, to come back one more time and hit it square on the head and talk about it hard, you got to make this about risk mitigation. It's not just about hitting the schedule. You've got to be able to talk about how you're going to mitigate the risk of failure of the ERP, how you're going to mitigate the risk of non-adherence and disruptive behavior by people that don't want to change. You have to be able to talk to the governance of timetables and the financials and hitting the budget and all that. But you've got to have a really good story that can give you an understanding of what's coming, and will help with the corporate risk mitigation, because corporate risk includes cash flow and includes the P&L and how the investors look at things. And that's why I keep talking about this. So again, figure out what the risk profile is of your company. Make sure you understand where your company is and what the health of the company is and what the people are worried about. Because the easiest way to crash on this is to walk in, like I said, the day after something bad happens or while something bad's happening that you're not aware of. So, if we're talking about risk, you got to not only be able to mitigate it. Mitigating is one of those things where when it happens, I know what I'm going to do. And what I'd rather do is be able to avoid having to make that decision. And the thing I don't like about risk assessment, and I've struggled with this professionally, but risk assessments, they basically say, here's the current state and that's the way it is. I don't like to just mitigate the risk. I want to figure out a way to remove the circumstances that allow risk to happen. And the matrices that we have are more about where the problems will occur and mitigate why. Mitigate not the why. So when you're talking about risk, and turn this upside down, because chances are that risk table and the risk profiles that your CFO's got running around are going to be about mitigation and why, and figure out a way to convey how your ERP can avoid the risk, not just be able to mitigate the risk. And one of the things too to keep in mind, and I'm trying to find a better way to say this, but I think the original way I was going to talk about it's just going to we'll do. When we're talking about risk and when we're talking about the story, collaboration is important. These collaborative solutions. And if you think about a process to make sure that you're successful, and again, this comes back to mitigating or avoiding, we'll use my own terminology, this is about avoiding the risk of a failure of implementation. It's about aligning the expectations among all the parties, all the players, the executive sponsors, the mid-level managers, and the people that are working. Building trust in the process. People have to be heard. They have to be involved. It's okay if you don't do what they ask or do what they propose as a solution or propose as an opinion, but you have to give them feedback, and you have to have them understand what the reasoning and for decisions are. The other thing that's extremely important, and this is something that those of us who come through the finance function understand, I think, better than most, and I'll give you an example in a second, but you make and keep powerful commitments. And I mean that to be that you don't tell people what they want to hear when you're going to get something done. You tell people when it can be done, and you keep them informed on how you're doing with that, and you hit your commitment. It might be a date, it might be cost, and you talk about the things that are impacting your ability not to be able to do that, to make sure that people understand and may be able to give you a lot of input and help on it. You don't want to walk into the CFO and say, hey, I just overrun my budget. What you want to do is walk in 3 weeks earlier and say, it looks like I'm going to overrun my budget. I've got to make some decisions. Go talk to your CFO at that time. And the best way to tell you about how finance guys look at powerful commitments is, we pay you, twice a month or every 2 weeks. That is a powerful commitment we make, and we make sure that happens. That's the most important thing I do. That's more important than paying taxes for me. It's paying my employees. But we also have the commitment as a head of finance that to my investors is, I will close the books and give you a high quality financial statement on this day. I hit those dates. I have to hit them when I'm a publicly held company. I don't have a choice, but the privately held company, it's about my credibility. So from a finance guy standpoint, I understand hitting dates. I understand about hitting commitments, and that will resonate well. But part of the problem you face is not having these difficult conversations. Be that with your CFO when you go in and say, I might be overrunning this budget. Here are my problems. Here is what I'm facing. Nobody likes to have that conversation. So typically what happens is you wait until the cat's out of the bag, and then you go take, with your hat in your hand, and he yells at you for a while, and you walk out. Have the difficult conversations with whoever you need to when it's time, which is right now. If you've got players on your team that are not responding appropriately. You've got people that are trying to dissuade you or dissuade others from aligning with this. You got to have those difficult conversations. You can't shy away from it. You got to be strong. That's what a leader has to do. A leader of the CRP has to be able to have those kind of conversations at all levels. You got to be creative and innovative. I would tell you that's probably why engineers, I wouldn't suggest that your IT and engineering guys do this, but you know, innovation to the problems that you're going to run into is important, and we see that every day. And all of you that are listening have those examples where, you know, the solutions were innovative and creative and they happened. And it's about solving problems. The implementation process is about solving problems, because problems will arise. There will be conflicts between, you know, what you want to do and what the system can do. There'll be the decisions that one department reached on how they want to treat something versus another department, and you've got to be able to manage and mitigate that. And you've got to be creative and innovative. And it kind of goes back, if you think about all the things I've talked about already, they're kind of rolling downhill to this. But the thing that kind of ties it all together with me, and it was something that I talked about, well, I didn't really talk about it, it was on the screen, so if anybody wants to go back and look at my profile, I talk about it. But you got to execute with relentless commitment to delivery. This is about delivering. This is not about a date. This is about delivering. A date is part of that delivery, but delivering the solution. We were talked about solutionizing. This is a relentless commitment to delivering the solution. Now, you want to do it on time and on budget, but you want to get it done. And if you can't do it on time and on budget, you got to be involving a lot of people in that conversation and having that difficult conversation. However, I will tell you that you've got to be relentless about this, and you've got to make sure it happens. And it's again, you're going to be managing a lot of things in this process. You're going to be managing outside vendors, probably multiple outside vendors that have competing interests. You're going to be dealing with people that are billing you by the hour and are just happy, you know, to continue to do that. You've got to deliver on your commitment to what it's going to cost. So there's a conflict right there. So I could hit the date, but it's going to cost me more. I could miss the date, but it was going to cost me what I said it would. And it's about then going up a couple of notches and saying, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with you know, with the guy that wants it delivered on this date and the guy that wants me to stay in the budget. And you got to have those conversations and be prepared. I think this is the last slide, I believe. And this again comes back down, and it's interesting. I don't know. I hope you guys have noticed about this. Is you know, I didn't spend a lot of time on here's how you calculate savings. You know, the success of the project of getting it approved and the success of the project of getting it implemented, to me, keeps coming down to communication. It's about understanding what your story is and being able to tell it in a convincing way that aligns people to your way of thinking and or aligns people to the project at hand. It's about having difficult conversations. It's about making and keeping commitments. It's about having, you know, this ruthless devotion, a ruthless commitment to delivery. And when I started thinking about, you know, where projects fail, how do things fail, I keep coming back to communication. Now, certainly, you know, I've implemented bad softwares. I've had problems with conflicts that were unanticipated. But ultimately, when I've missed dates, when I've missed money, or missed budgets, I should say, when I've been disappointed in an outcome that was on time and on budget, it ended up being related to communication failures. If you think about this project, it is a sequence of millions and millions of communication transactions. It's about human transactions, and it's through conversations. It's that way when you're developing the plan. It's that way when you're delivering the plan through your story to your executive team. It's that way when you're setting the table with all your vendors in a room and your employees, when you're, you know, the first time you all get together and start talking about what your vision is for the implementation and how you want it to end and when you want it to end. It's about how you have problems come up during the project and how you address them and how you communicate them and how you interact with people. So to me, that's why I keep talking about the plan is important. The planning is, because the planning is about communication. The implementation is about communication. And these are nice little buckets I like. and being mindful of these, and then taking them back to the very beginning of this presentation and having them as your starting point, and think in terms about how you tell the story with these, how you communicate with these, how you write up your ERP presentation with these, I think will make the product of your effort be much more important and innovative and insightful and compelling. So let's talk about this real quick, or at least I'll talk about them and you get to listen. How about that? Fact-free planning. This is a wonderful thing, and I can tell you, as I've moved up in organizations and gotten more money and bigger offices, it's a lot easier for me to do. But a project is set up to fail when deadlines or resource limits are set with no consideration for reality. It is important as the project planning group and during the planning process to make sure that this doesn't happen. You can't just set a date. You can't just say, oh, we only need 2 people because that's all I got. You really got to put the rigor in. There's that word again. You got to put the rigor in. Now, I'll tell you this about dates, and I'll tell you in the same term I've told lots and lots of people when I've discussed this. You've got 2 ways to determine dates on a project, and I would say the Olympics is one way. The Olympics are held every 4 years in a certain spot at a certain time, and I'd better be ready to run that marathon on that day because I don't have a choice. Okay. Then you think about something a little more leisurely, where you're building a house, and you've got to deal with weather, and you've got to deal with deliveries of material and things like that. And so you kind of got a date in mind of when you're going to be done, but that date is a bit squishy, and that's okay because you want it done right, but you don't have to hit a hard date. So the way the planning works on those 2 scenarios is, I know this date, and that's the date I got to go live, so everything backs up from there. The best world example is, if I'm implementing an ERP in China, I don't want to do it mid-year. I want to do it on January 1st because it's going to make my statutory auditing much easier when I have to deal with the government when they come and do an audit and only have one accounting system of record. You might have the death of a system is going to be on a certain date. So there's clearly the Olympic reason for how you do project planning or date planning is important. Then there's the house way is, I know I want a new ERP. It doesn't really matter if I do my conversions in July or August. So I'm not going to be too upset on that date range, but it's got to be done right, because when I make the switch, it's got to be okay. It's got to run like it's supposed to. So dates can be set either way. Next bullet, though, I'm going to go back to the presentation here after my little sermon. AWOL sponsors. This is a good one, and it's been fun as being the executive sponsor, because I'm probably more involved than a lot of my guys want me to be, because I like this kind of stuff. But you get somebody to sign up as a sponsor, or you sign them up because they happen to be the vice president of being the sponsor, say, and they don't provide any leadership. They don't provide their clout, their time or energy to see a project through. That's going to be an out-of-the-box failure. You got to have the right person being the sponsor, and if you don't have a good sponsor, that's when you got to have a difficult conversation with with the person you need to be the sponsor and their boss. You cannot let that one slip, because the executive sponsor has got to make sure that they've got to provide all of their political clout, all their gravitas, all of their influence in getting this done, because it's a holistic company-wide implementation. So it can't be the chief information officer necessarily. Well, that's probably a bad example, but I wouldn't want them as my sponsor. You can't make it the head of manufacturing who doesn't really want this to happen. It's got to be the guy that can get it done and get it through with his peers or her peers. Skirting is a problem we have, and I don't like facing this. I don't like having to deal with this, but it happens all the time. But people working around the priority setting process. So you sit through a meeting and say, these are the things you're going to work on, and everybody seems to be in agreement. And then there's the one person that works on what they want. Time for a difficult conversation. I appreciate all your effort. What you're working on, I know, is important ultimately to the project. However, I need you working on this priority, because right now this is what we need to get done, and there are people depending on you finishing this work before you do anything else. You got to have that difficult conversation. You got to be able to identify and quickly engage when people are doing the things that are not adding to the project plan or the planning process that you've come up with in the order that you need them. Project Chicken, I love this one. I've sat in meetings where I sat on my thumbs because I was the guy that was on the chicken side of this, and it's actually more uncomfortable than having an uncomfortable conversation where the person telling somebody they're not doing it right. But leaders and members that don't admit when there's a problem in the project, but instead wait for someone else to speak up first. This is a problem. People know there's a problem, but they don't want to be the guy that says, I don't want to, they'll shoot the messenger. I can't be the person that says, we just found out that, we just spent 300 vendor hours on getting this done, but, they did it the way we told them, but the way we told them was wrong. They got to redo it. You cannot allow that to happen. That has got to be a commitment made. All of these really have to be a commitment made as part of the story to the executive team on how you're not going to let this happen, because that's a way to kill a project. That's a way for a project to die unnaturally, just put it that way. And it is a difficult conversation, and it is something that is an expectation that has to be set early, and it has to be set often. And it has to come with no blame. If you're the person that's discovered a problem, they've got to be able to speak up and talk about it. And the final one is on team failures. And teams are, again, a collection of people, and that collection of people communicate. But you got to make sure the people that are on the team are supporting and the right, are doing the right things. I would rather have a lower skill, committed, energetic person than the person that's absolutely the best at what they do but don't really care about the project. Because again, the apathy is going to hurt you, and they're going to be this passive aggressive blocker to getting a lot of things done. And there's a lot of consideration for putting those kind of malcontent people on your project. Well, if they're on the project and they're on the team, they're going to magically see the wisdom of what we're doing. Or, well, if they're every day, I can watch them and make sure they're doing the right thing. And some of that is absolutely true. However, the team has got to be strong. It's got to be energetic. They've got to be supportive. They've got to be ruthless about about delivery. They've got to accept the fact that there are going to be difficult conversations. They've got to accept the fact that they have absolute authority to point out problems and missing things or cost overruns or whatever it might be without recrimination. They've got to be able to set priorities and do them. So you got to be careful on this team failure thing. You got to be careful about bringing people in to be converts, into the team when the team needs to be working towards the goal. And if the team's there trying to get somebody converted in the line, they're wasting their time. They're working on the wrong things. So in summary on that, this is really the box at the bottom. I talk about powerful commitments, but it still comes back down to this communication thing, to the human factor. Missing conversations, meaning silence, leads to insincere commitments and thus failed expectations. Insincere commitments will kill you. Silence will kill you. If you're the person that knows something's not right and you don't speak up, it'll kill you. So again, just to try to tie it all together here, as I'm done, and Josh hopefully will come in a minute. I'll be done in a second, Josh, and we have plenty of time for questions, I believe. But again, start at the back of this. You use this as a guide. Start at the back, and think about in terms of why teams fail and why team interaction is so important in order to help create your story, aligning yourself with the right way, planning with the right level of vigor, identifying the right people to be on the team, making sure you have the right sponsor, and good luck. One of the things that we'll tell you is that Josh is available. I'm certainly available. You got my email address. I'm happy to talk through these kind of things. I do it often, and I am not the whiz and sage end all be all. However, I've got a lot of scars and I've got a lot of war stories, and I've made it to a position where I'm making decisions like this all the time, and I know what I look for, and I know why I was not successful when I was earlier in my career and younger, is I didn't necessarily understand, what message I should be bringing, what story I should be telling. And now I understand what story I want to hear. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you. And you might have a completely different CFO, and I might be, just, full of hot water or hot air, I guess you say. I was going to say something else, and then I thought it might be a family call and didn't want to say it. But so, again, please reach out to me if I can help. I'm happy to bounce ideas off with you. And with that, I will turn it over to Josh, assuming you're still on and I haven't lost conversations with everybody and been talking to myself for an hour.
Yep, we are still here, and we do have a couple of questions. So I will, okay. I guess everyone, again, there's a Q&A sidebar on the right-hand side of your screen, I believe. If you have any questions, feel free to fill those out, and we'll go through some of these that we already have. So starting back at the beginning, Michael, we've got a question. It's always easy to postpone an ERP project. How do you know when the time is right?
Well, that's a great, and then that's always the easy answer because, again, it's big and ugly and nasty. But I think if you approach it with what are the risks and what are the risks that are keeping my executive team and CFO, I speak in my terms, but what's keeping my executive team up at night? What are the things they're talking about? When you see them sitting in their office and they're not on the computer and they're not on the phone and they're staring out into space, they're thinking about something that's bothering them. Figure out what those are, because if you can figure out and understand what those are, and you can have a solution that the ERP can provide, it may not, but if it can, that will help them with their problem, and therefore it is a good and opportune time to do the implementation. It also helps that you've got good cash flow.
All right, next question. Was it difficult to convince your board to go with a cloud-based system?
Yes, it was at the beginning, and I will say this without sounding too xenophobic. They were very British at the time on it, but I've also had that problem other places. And it came down to risk. It came down to data security, and it took a while because there was a lot of technical things involved in that. But ultimately, what we did, and Microsoft was masterful at supporting me on this, and that's another piece I did not bring out. Not only are the vendors out there that are going to help you with the implementation, Microsoft is very, very supportive of this. And they helped me craft a story that basically said, how can we evaluate the safety and security of the cloud in Microsoft versus the safety and security of our system, which is sitting in our data center in our office here, that has just as much exposure out into the world because it's plugged into the world. People know where we are, and I'm sure there's people trying to get into us through my firewall, and how much better and more secure it can be behind a Microsoft or an Amazon Web Services or these big guys, because that's what they do. Their whole business plan boils down to the credibility of keeping that data secure. And they've got to be able to do it for companies that are a lot bigger than mine and probably yours. And if they can do that for people that are really, really important, like the Department of Defense or General Motors, or quite frankly Microsoft themselves, you ever go out and watch? There's a internet site you can go to, and you can watch all of the real-time hacking attempts and all that kind of stuff. And they're all pounding out there, in Redmond, Washington. And the reason is because that's where Microsoft is. So those guys deal with this much more than we ever will on a daily basis, and they're much better at doing it. And that was really the story I told, was I'm not the right guy to protect our data. I got somebody that's, I want to go with the 800-pound gorilla to protect my data. And that was the overwhelming argument that we had, and got a lot of support out of Microsoft.
Great. Next question. How do you avoid an ERP project that just re-implements the current dysfunctional processes with new screens without getting caught in analysis paralysis?
Great. And that was exactly what I was facing at Suntech, and that's why I evaluated very hard I had a very creative vendor partner on that, and we came up with this, why don't we install the demo? And then then that way I don't need to worry about simply migrating bad practices out of an old ERP into a new ERP. So we basically took the demo, loaded it into our system. We had to do some, clearly you have to deal with chart of accounts and bombs and routers and, where the quality process elements are. And then we simply started training people on it. And it was during the training process where people would say, gee, how do I do it this way? Or this is something I do, where we could make configuration changes. But I did not want to give people too much opportunity to simply, recreate what they're already doing. And I think that is a very, very viable solution for you to think about, is basically implement the demo. Because there's 150 or 60 or whatever the number is, business processes in there, and if you do them based on good business practices, world-class business practices, which is the way that's designed, then you're going to eliminate a lot of that conflict. And you also have a cultural conversation that says, gee, I know that you like, to type your return authorizations on a typewriter, Mary, but, this one does it all in the internet, in the system, and that's the way we got to do it, because that's the way the system's making us do it. And so then you are forcing that compliance that way, and you're blaming something other than, the head of the project who said, by God, we're not going to do it her way. So it protects a lot of people, and it protects the emotions in a lot of ways of the people that are affected, who like their old way and like the traditional way, so to speak, and allows them to adapt in their own way because, well, it's the way the system's making me do it. The worst thing to do is ask somebody the way they want it done, and then tell them they can't, and then say no. That makes them feel belittled, generally. So, if they don't have a choice, they just adapt.
All right, we have one final question, but it's a two-parter for you on communication. So how many people are part of the core ERP project team, and then how often do you communicate outside of that core project team?
Yeah, I think, it's one of those that I don't want to sound like a consultant because that's not what I am, but it depends. But I would suggest to you that in a company that has, I'll say not a normal company, but an average company that has a manufacturing function and, customer service and sales and accounting and engineering development, your core team probably ought to be, 6 or 8 people, including IT, and probably including HR. They're going to have a component to play, but you also want them to help on some change management and communication issues. I've even had marketing people in there to help me craft things. So you got 6 or 8 people. If you have more than one location, especially if you have locations in different countries, you want engagement from those places also. And you need to plan on the fact that they need to be with you at, periodically. We had a facility in China, and I had, one of our Chinese representative, you could call him. He came to quarterly over to the U.S. and we went over there as a team in order to keep that engagement high. So that core team does need to expand a little bit depending on the types of locations you have. And what I found is that you typically have a core team of that team that is in constant contact and constant discussions. I would suggest it's the executive sponsor, the project manager, and the IT person is your core team, and they need to be communicating very, very often, multiple times a week. That communication process would draw in people depending on what we were talking about, so the other core team members. That core team ought to meet probably in the heat of the moment at least weekly, and then expanding that out to the executive sponsor team, so it would be the department managers that may not be in there with subject matter experts, so that next, if you think of it as a circle, you got a circle of 3 or 4 people at the very center, but your core team is really a circle of 8. That next circle of 16 or something total, so 8 more people, that ought to be a monthly kind of conversation. And the other thing I found was, especially with technology today, is there's very easy ways with SharePoint to keep people informed, and it's a passive way of communicating, but it's a way that really can be powerful because it allows people to, on their own time, go out and figure out where you are. So meeting minutes and wireframes, or the flow charts and statuses, and training, upcoming training things can all be in SharePoint, and people can see what's going on and seeing the action and activity, and they can do it at their leisure.
All right, that's all the questions that we have. So Michael, thank you very much for your time. Everyone, we have our next session in 3 weeks on improving financial management, where we actually get into the financial management demo of Dynamics 365. So we hope to see everyone then.
Good. I appreciate everybody. Thank you again. Need to reach out to us, please do.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.